Welcome to this, our third session in our series Word Processing for Academic Writing. In this session we're going to look at applying a table of contents to a document. Now the table of contents is part of your References tab, and everything that you need is within this first subgroup. We will be later looking at footnotes, citations and bibliography in other sessions, but for the moment we're concentrating on the table of contents. Now, table of contents uses styles to assess what needs to be included in the table. So if we go to the Home tab first, table of contents is using headings 1, 2 and 3. Under normal writing you're using the normal style, and we have set this previously to Times New Roman 12 to conform with a style guide. The same will apply to your headings, and within these styles you need to make the appropriate changes so that you conform with your style guide, and this is quite easy to do. If I right click on heading 1, I can modify that and I can change it from Cambria headings to Times New Roman. I can change it to 12. I'm going to leave it bold because I want the heading to stand out from the main body of text, and I'm going to change the color to automatic. One final change I need to make in here is to format the paragraph. So I'm clicking on the format button, I'm going to paragraph, and you can see the spacing before is 24, which is far too big for us. We need it at 6. So if I say OK to that, and I'm back to my modify style, don't change the heading name because table of contents was relying on finding heading 1 and the style that's being applied there to include it in the table. So if I now say OK to that, you will see that heading 1 will change up here to reflect what I've just done. You see the text go black, and I need in turn to do the same with heading 2. So I'll modify that, and I'm going to change that to Times New Roman, again to 12, and the color to automatic. And once again, just check the paragraph is OK, and again that's at 18, so I'm going to reduce that down to 6 and say OK. And once again, once I say OK to that, you'll see heading 2 reflect what I've just done. So that gives you a little confidence boost that your headings have actually changed for you. If we modify 3, Times New Roman 12, and I'm going to change that to automatic, and once again check the paragraph settings, and that is at 6, so that will suit me fine, and I'll say OK to that. Now the reason why you have heading 1, heading 2 and heading 3 in your table of contents is that the subsections within each chapter can be determined by using heading 2 or heading 3, and each one will then be indented on your table of contents. So in order to get the table of contents up and running, I'm going to put in some random text as we did before. So using the equals, rand, brackets, 10 paragraphs, 10 lines in each, close the brackets and press enter. And I now have my 4-page document with 2000 words. If I use Control and Home, it will bring me to the top of the document, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press the enter key here, and I'm going to move up to that line again. So on that line I'm going to choose heading 1, and I'm going to type in chapter 1. Now I'm using simple chapter 1s here, but it could be whatever that chapter is called: introduction, literature review, methodology, so on and so forth. So that whatever you type in at this point, that's what's going to go into your table of contents. And you can see that that is using heading 1 style, whereas the main body of the text is using normal. So any changes you make to your normal text, don't use heading 1 unless you want it to appear in your table of contents. So at this stage we're now ready to start our table of contents. I'm just going to again press the enter key to give me an extra line, and just for convenience sake I'm going to place the table of contents at the top of this document. Again, refer to your style guide and it will tell you where your table of contents needs to be within your document. So going to the References tab, I can click on the Table of Contents button, and that will give me a list of automatic and manual table of contents. The table of contents goes in where your cursor is. So if I click on this first one here, it will be placed in the document where the cursor was. And this word contents, you can see, is now outside our style guide. So I can actually highlight that text and go to the Home tab, and not using a style but actually using the font subgroup, I can bring that within the requirements of my style guide. Now sometimes you will be asked to make this a little bit bigger than the actual contents itself, so we leave it at 14, and I'll change the font to automatic. Now the reason why you do that using the font subgroup rather than heading 1 style is if I use heading 1 style for this word contents, it will then show up in my table of contents, and you will have a table of contents telling you where the table of contents is. So chapter 1 is now in place. I'm going to go to page 2 of the document, and if you're navigating through a document, a very handy little tool is if you go Control and G on your keyboard, Find and Replace comes up on the Go To tab, and I'm going to go to a page 2 in the document, and if I click on Go To, that brings me straight to the top of page 2. I'm going to take this paragraph here as the beginning of a new chapter. So I'm going to move down 1 line, and in here go to heading 1 and call that chapter 2. Okay, so I have that in heading 1. If I use Control and Home to get to the top of the document, you can see that only chapter 1 is in the table of contents. And the reason why that is, I need to update the table. So if I click Update Table, I have 2 options. I can update page numbers only, or I can update the entire table. I use this one more often than update numbers only, because it will search the entire document and it will look for heading styles and include them within your table of contents. So you can scan an entire document and have your table of contents assembled for you in one go. So if I update that and say OK, and you can see I now have chapter 1 on page 1 and chapter 2 on page 2. And that's the basic idea behind the table of contents. And we're now going to look at why you need heading 2 and heading 3. If I move the mouse to chapter 2, you can actually see I've got a hover hint here which tells me if I control and click, it will actually bring me directly to where chapter 2 begins. So if I hold down the control key, you can see the mouse turns into a hand, and I left click once and I'm brought to chapter 2. So within this chapter we're going to have some subheadings. So I'm going to use this paragraph to create a subheading, and in here I'm going to put in heading 2, and we'll call this new research. And then on the next paragraph, another subsection, and we're going to use heading 3. So it'll be a further subsection within that paragraph. So we'll call this readings. Now again, these subheadings are decided by you within the document, and whatever headings you use, they will appear in your table of contents. So if I now go back to the table of contents and I choose to update the table, I can update the entire table. If I say OK to that, you will see that chapter 2 now has a subheading called New Research, and that in turn has a subheading called Readings, and they're indented further and further into the document. So if I use Control click to click on Readings, it will bring me directly to that point in the document. So I'm going to go on to page 4, and on this page I'm going to create our chapter 3. So again, I'm making space for the heading. I'm going to use heading 1 and I'm going to type in chapter 3. And again, I'm going back to the top to the table of contents. Now every time you put in a heading, as I say, you don't need to update your table. What I normally do is I would do it at the end of a session just before I save. I'd update the table of contents and then save the document. It saves you constantly going back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to update the table of contents. I'm going to update the entire table because I know I've put in some extra headings rather than just numbers. And if I say OK to that, you'll see that I now have chapter 1, 2 and 3 in place. Also, what can happen is if I move a chapter from one place to another, goes onto a separate page. If we go directly to chapter 3, and what I'm going to do, I have that on page 4. So like we did on our last session, I'm going to insert a page break because I want chapter 3 to start on page 5. If I go back to the table of contents and update the table of contents, update the entire table, you can see that chapter 3 is now on page 5 rather than page 4. So what the table of contents is doing for you is it's automating the process of capturing the data and placing that within your table of contents for you. As you work through the document, from time to time, go to your table of contents and just update the table and everything will be in place. So it's a fairly simple process. Again, make sure that your headings are meeting your requirements of your style guide. Go to the point where you need your table of contents to be placed. Again, within your style guide, that will tell you. And then insert your table of contents. Now you can use the ribbon here to update your table of contents and add other text to it. But I prefer to go to the actual table and use this update table button here because you can then see the table of contents and you can see what's actually happening as you work through the document. So with the help of a table of contents, you can fully automate that process and just get on with writing your document and know that when you're finished, your table of contents will be exactly as you require it to be.